I'm about to show you the 10 best Civil War movies ever made, and I guarantee almost nobody watching has actually seen number 7. I've got John Wayne blowing up trains, Denzel Washington charging a fortress, and a movie so butchered by the studio it barely survived. John Ford made some of the greatest westerns ever. Stagecoach, The Searchers, She Wore a Yellow Ribbon. The Civil War was always kind of lurking in the background of his films, but he almost never dealt with it directly. Horse Soldiers is one of the rare times he actually made a full movie about the war itself. And honestly, it's not his best work. Horse Soldiers is basically a men-on-a-mission adventure that treats the bloodshed more like a John Wayne parade than an actual war. Wayne leads a Union cavalry unit alongside William Holden, and they're disrupting Confederate supply lines during the Vicksburg campaign. Holden's terrific in it, and there are moments where you can see Ford's touch, but mostly it's just your standard war adventure movie. I think the most interesting thing here is Ford seemed almost reluctant to engage with the Civil War head-on. Miramax wanted Cold Mountain to be the next Gone with the Wind. They had Nicole Kidman and Renee Zellweger at the peak of their Oscar-winning powers. They had Anthony Minghella, who just made The English Patient and the talented Mr. Ripley. They adapted Charles Frazier's best-selling novel about a North Carolina deserter and the woman waiting for him. They even shot it in Romania to make it look epic. It didn't become Gone with the Wind, but Zellweger got her Oscar out of it, and the film is actually better than its reputation suggests. What makes Cold Mountain interesting is it shows a side of the Civil War that doesn't get much attention. It's about North Carolina, which was one of the last states to join the Confederacy and never really loved by the Virginia politicians running things. The state was poorer than its neighbors, and it led the South in deserters. The movie's harrowing and cynical about what the war did to people who had no stake in it beyond being forced to fight. That's not the Civil War story Hollywood usually tells, and that's probably why Miramax's Gone with the Wind dreams didn't pan out, but it's a more honest one. This one's Hollywood's giant love letter to Western mythology, and it tries to tell the entire story of the American 19th century in one film. The cast is ridiculous in the best way possible. There's Henry Fonda, Gregory Peck, Jimmy Stewart, Debbie Reynolds, Lee J. Cobb, Richard Widmark, just everyone who was anyone. The best parts involve Debbie Reynolds running away from her frontier family to become a riverboat dancer and falling for Gregory Peck's gambler. But the movie's trying to cover everything, so eventually it gets to the Civil War. John Ford directed that segment. He cast Harry Morgan as Grant and, this is the funny part, John Wayne as William Sherman. John Wayne, who just a few years earlier played the most Yankee-hating Confederate sympathizing character ever in The Searchers, is now playing Sherman. If you're going to make a Civil War movie, you might as well start with the most famous Civil War novel ever written. The Red Badge of Courage, published in 1895 by Stephen Crane, is about a young Union private who runs away during battle. He spends the rest of the story trying to wash away his shame by getting wounded, by earning that red badge that proves he's brave. What made Crane's novel so important was when it came out. This was before the South rewrote the whole Civil War as this romantic lost cause story about noble gentlemen fighting Northern aggression. Crane just wrote about a scared kid dealing with the psychological horror of war. John Huston came back from World War II and decided to adapt it in 1951. Huston had gotten darker after the war. You can see it in films like The Treasure of Sierra Madre. He brought that cynicism to Red Badge. But MGM tested it with audiences and panicked. They cut the movie down to 69 minutes and stitched what was left together with voiceover narration pulled straight from Crane's book. So what you end up with is this fascinating, frustrated mess of a film. You can see what Huston was trying to do, but the studio butchered it before anyone could really experience it. Harvey Weinstein gave Martin Scorsese a blank check. Make whatever you want, full control, just no final cut. Scorsese decided to make an epic about New York in the 1860s, right in the middle of the Civil War. The Civil War itself is mostly background. The real story is about a young Irish immigrant played by Leonardo DiCaprio who's sworn to kill the man who murdered his father. That man is Daniel Day-Lewis's character. this contradictory bigot who becomes a father figure to the kid who wants him dead. The Civil War crashes into all of this through the draft riots of 1863. First generation dealing with the draft, and it's the working poor whose sons are getting conscripted at gunpoint while rich New Yorkers can buy their way out for $300. That's about $5,000 in today's money. The film's ending shows the Union Army coming in to put down the riots, and all these petty gang rivalries that seem so important just get obliterated. Despite the cheerful title, Friendly Persuasion is really about how persuasive violence actually is, how hard it is to stay above it when war comes to your doorstep. It's set in Indiana during the Civil War, and it follows this Quaker family. The mother, played by Dorothy McGuire, is deeply religious and runs the local ministry. The father, Gary Cooper, is a bit more worldly but still committed to their pacifist beliefs. Then Confederate bushwhackers come through and slaughter a nearby community. So the family's oldest son decides he can't sit by anymore. He picks up a gun and goes to fight. The father has to go find him after he gets wounded on the front line. I don't know how historically accurate the bushwhacking stuff is for Indiana specifically, but whatever the real history was, the film uses its setting beautifully. It's light and funny until suddenly it's not, and then you're watching a family deal with an impossible choice. Spielberg made a movie about Abraham Lincoln and decided not to do the obvious thing. He didn't give you Lincoln's whole life, didn't give you the log cabin childhood or the entire presidency. He gave you a few months. The movie's focused on this narrow window between Lincoln's re-election and his second inauguration. During that time, Lincoln was trying to pass the 13th Amendment, the one that would actually end slavery for real. Because here's the thing, people sometimes forget about the Emancipation Proclamation. It was a wartime political document that only freed slaves in the rebelling Confederate states. The border states that stayed with the Union still had slaves, so technically the proclamation had no teeth. Lincoln knew this. He realized that if the South came back into the Union, they could just undo everything. So he used every political trick, some honest sausage making and some less than honest maneuvering, to get enough votes in Congress to pass the 13th Amendment and end slavery permanently. The movie barely shows you any battlefields. It's all backroom politics, congressional debates, Lincoln working the angles. And it works because of Daniel Day-Lewis, who gives one of those performances where you forget you're watching an actor. Gettysburg is a 4-hour epic about the battle that turned the tide of the Civil War. This was Lee's big gamble, his first and only attempt to invade the North. 3 days of fighting near a Pennsylvania town, and when it was over, the Confederacy never recovered. The movie was originally supposed to be a miniseries for ABC. They canceled it mid-production. Then Ted Turner picked it up for TNT and eventually got New Line to distribute it theatrically. The film is divided over 3 days, following 3 different perspectives: Union Cavalry Officer John Buford, Union Colonel Joshua Chamberlain, and Confederate General James Longstreet. It's the first film ever shot on the actual Gettysburg battlefield. They even got permission to film in the national park. Civil War reenactors from all over the country showed up to be in it, thousands of them, and the result is either the most faithful recreation of a battle ever put on screen or the greatest reenactment ever assembled, depending on how you look at it. Instead of focusing on the big armies fighting in the East, Ride with the Devil is about the guerrilla warfare that happened in Missouri and Kansas. These were the border states where neighbors killed neighbors based on politics. Confederate sympathizers called bushwhackers fighting Union sympathizers called jayhawks. No uniforms, no rules, just people murdering each other in the woods. The main character is Jake, played by Tobey Maguire. He's not even American. He's a German immigrant whose father moved to Missouri when he was a kid. But his best friend comes from a family with Confederate sympathies, so Jake becomes a bushwhacker too. The turning point is when William Quantrill, a real historical figure, leads the bushwhackers on a raid to Lawrence, Kansas. They massacre everyone: Union soldiers, free black citizens, any male old enough to hold a rifle. It's presented as exactly what it was, a war crime. But the movie keeps going long after the fighting ends for these characters. It shows them trying to figure out what to do with their lives when the war is over and they're too young to have any skills besides killing. Robert Gould Shaw was 25 years old when he led the 54th Massachusetts Volunteer Infantry into battle at Fort Wagner in 1863. It was the only full battle he ever commanded them in because he died during the assault. So did more than half his men. The 54th was the first African-American infantry regiment in the U.S. military, and Fort Wagner was essentially a suicide mission. The government knew it, Shaw knew it, and his soldiers knew it. But they went anyway, and they fought with a distinction that changed how the country viewed its black citizens. Edward Zwick made glory about that charge in 1989. Matthew Broderick plays Shaw competently enough, but the real power comes from the volunteers. Denzel Washington, Morgan Freeman, Andre Braugher, Jimmy Kennedy. Some were escaped slaves, some were free men, and the film takes time with each of their stories leading up to that day outside Fort Wagner.